The millionaire's special daughter cried silently, forgotten on her own birthday, until the nanny prepares a simple surprise and changes the fate of that house. But when the father arrives, what he does transforms everything. The iron gates, as tall and imposing as the walls of a fortress, swung open in a near-reverent silence, revealing a pale stone driveway that snaked through a flawlessly designed garden. To Helena, who had gotten off the bus 2 blocks away and walked with her heart hammering in her chest, the place looked like something out of a movie. This was the estate of Arthur Vance, a name she only knew from the business pages of the newspapers. A multimillionaire whose fortune was built on the solid bedrock of daring stock market investments and an almost prophetic business acumen. Every leaf on the trees here seemed polished, every inch of grass trimmed with surgical precision. Yet behind the cold, calculated beauty, Helena felt a chill. It was the silence. A heavy, dense silence that not even the birdsong could pierce. The house, a modern structure of glass and concrete, rose like a monument to wealth. But it seemed devoid of laughter, of life, of warmth. She was met by a housekeeper with stern features, Mrs. Albright, who led her down hallways that echoed her every step. The polished marble reflected the pale light streaming through gigantic windows but failed to warm the space. There were no family photos on the walls, only abstract art, as distant and indecipherable as the master of the house. And then he appeared. Arthur Vance was exactly as the photographs depicted him. Tall, in an impeccably tailored suit, with a gaze that seemed to calculate the value of everything around him. His eyes, a stormy grey, analyzed Helena from head to toe, not with interest, but with the efficiency of someone assessing a new asset for his vast portfolio. "The rules are clear, Ms. Helena," he said, his voice a controlled baritone that left no room for argument. "You will care for Leah. Nutrition, hygiene, and therapies. Nothing more. I don't want unnecessary intimacies. Discretion is the most valuable commodity in this house." Helena just nodded, feeling small under the monumental ceiling. Her entire being, accustomed to the tight-knit embrace of her community, the sound of children playing in the street, and the smell of a neighbor's cornbread cake baking in the oven, felt alien in this universe of luxury and solitude. Her training was in childhood education. Her gift was affection. But here, it seemed only obedience would be required. It was then that she saw her. Seated in a white leather armchair, facing a floor-to-ceiling window, was Leah, a little girl of 5, with fine, light hair like her father's, and almond-shaped eyes that watched a world she didn't seem to be a part of. She didn't turn when Helena entered, showed no reaction. Her small fingers simply traced invisible figures on the cold glass, as if trying to draw a different reality on the other side. Helena approached slowly, her heart aching. Ignoring Arthur's intimidating presence, she knelt beside the armchair. "Hello, Leah. I'm Helena," she said, in the softest voice she could find. The girl turned her face slowly, and in her eyes, Helena didn't see the emptiness she expected, but a melancholic depth, a silent wisdom that completely disarmed her. Leah didn't respond, but her gaze locked with Helena's, a mute acknowledgement that lasted an instant, but felt like an eternity. That first afternoon, while arranging the girl's few clothes in a white lacquer drawer, Helena found something that shouldn't have been there. Hidden under a pile of wool socks was a small treasure of folded papers. They were drawings, childish drawings, colored with an almost desperate urgency. Cakes, dozens of birthday cakes, of all shapes and colors, some with frosting dripping down, others with star-shaped sprinkles, and on every single one, at the very top, was a single lit candle. Helena looked at the little girl, who had gone back to staring at the garden through the window, and a painful understanding hit her. In this house where money bought everything, the one thing that was priceless was missing. And there, her heart in pieces, Helena knew she couldn't just be an employee anymore. A silent promise was born in that moment. A promise that could cost her the job, but might just give a small soul back her right to dream. Helena's first full day of work began with the sound of silence. In that house, dawn wasn't announced by roosters crowing or the sound of the newspaper being delivered, but by a cold, bluish light that seeped through the giant windows, drawing perfect squares on the marble floor. The schedule provided by Mrs. Albright was military grade. Breakfast at 7 sharp, online speech therapy at 8 am, fine motor skill exercises at 9. Everything was measured, controlled, sterile. Helena tried to break the rigidity with a smile, but it seemed to get lost in the vastness of the professional-grade kitchen, where a private chef prepared a meal for Leah that was nutritionally perfect but visually uninspired. The girl ate without complaint, her eyes downcast, pushing food from one side of the plate to the other. It was during the motor skills activity, while Leah was supposed to fit colored pegs into a wooden board, that Helena noticed the girl's shoulders tensed, the frustration in her eyes with every piece that fell. Disobeying the first silent rule of the house, Helena sat on the floor at Leah's level. "How about we build a really tall tower?" she whispered, grabbing a few blocks that weren't part of the scheduled activity. For a moment, Leah stared at her, suspicious, as if expecting to be reprimanded. But then, a tiny, almost imperceptible spark appeared in her eyes. The tower began to grow, colorful and a little crooked. For the first time, Helena heard a sound from Leah that wasn't a monosyllable, a low, stifled little giggle when the tower finally tumbled down. It was a victory, a small, glorious victory, but the feeling was short-lived. From the doorway, Mrs. Albright watched with her arms crossed and an expression of granite disapproval. "The schedule specifies the use of pedagogical materials approved by Mr. Vance. Distractions are not conducive to development," she said, her voice as sharp as broken glass. Helena felt her face burn, but she stood up calmly, putting the blocks away. She was being watched, her every move analyzed. The housekeeper was the guardian of this mausoleum, and any breath of life was seen as a threat to the established order. Later, while Leah was down for her afternoon nap, Helena saw Arthur in his office. The glass door was ajar, and she could hear him, his voice firm and decisive, on a video call. He spoke of assets and liabilities, of an investment fund's profitability, and the need to convert part of his capital into dollars before the market turned. He was a maestro conducting an orchestra of numbers, a general commanding an army of figures. His eyes, focused on the screen, showed no emotion, only the cold calculation of profit. For a second, he looked up and saw Helena standing in the hallway. There was no recognition, just a quick assessment, as if she were another line item on his balance sheet, a necessary but irrelevant cost. Helena retreated, her heart heavy. How could a man so immersed in a world of abstract wealth understand the needs of a child who just wanted to build a tower of blocks? A sense of helplessness washed over her. She wasn't here to fight a system, just to care for a little girl. But it was increasingly seeming like the two things were inseparable. At the end of the day, exhausted, Helena went to tidy the playroom, which looked more like a showroom for an expensive toy store. It was then that she felt a light touch on her arm. It was Leah. The girl said nothing, but held out her small hand, and inside it was a small paper airplane, imperfectly folded from a napkin. Her eyes pleaded for Helena to keep it, a shared secret. Helena smiled, a genuine, grateful smile, and put the little treasure in her pocket. In that moment, she felt it was all worth it. Connection was possible. However, as she turned to leave the room, she came face to face with Mrs. Albright. The housekeeper wasn't looking at her, but at the pocket of her uniform, where the small paper plane made a slight bulge. Her lips curved into a thin, cold smile. "Excessive attachment is detrimental to the child and to the employee," she said, her voice low but loaded with an unmistakable threat. Mr. Vance detests emotional complications. I trust you understand the delicacy of your position. One wrong step, and the gate is right there. The days that followed were a tense ballet of obedience and subversion. Helena followed the schedule to the letter in Mrs. Albright's presence, but in the brief interludes when the housekeeper was away, she created little pockets of magic. She would hum an old lullaby while brushing Leah's hair, turn bath time into a naval expedition with a soap boat, and tell stories using hand shadows on the wall. They were minuscule acts of rebellion, sparks of warmth in a palace of ice. Leah, in turn, responded to these gestures with a growing trust. Her shoulders relaxed, her eyes began to follow Helena around the room, and occasionally a fleeting smile, like a glimpse of winter sun, would light up her face. She still wasn't speaking in full sentences, but her gestures and glances communicated more than words. The collection of cake drawings continued to grow, now made in secret and handed to Helena with the solemnity of someone sharing a treasure. Helena kept them in her uniform pocket, feeling the paper crinkle against her body like a constant reminder of her silent mission. Arthur Vance's presence in the house was like that of a powerful ghost. He was there, but at the same time, he wasn't. Helena saw him pass through the hallways, his phone glued to his ear, his mind miles away, navigating an ocean of stocks and cryptocurrencies. One afternoon, while helping Leah with a puzzle on the living room rug, she heard his voice coming from the office. "The company's net worth must be protected. We can't expose our assets to unnecessary risk. Move the funds to a safer investment, maybe gold or treasury bonds. The return might be lower, but the security of the capital is the priority." The words floated through the air, devoid of any human emotion. The soundtrack to this gilded loneliness. He entered the room for a moment to grab a folder, his gaze passing over his daughter and the caregiver as if they were part of the furniture. Leah flinched slightly, and the puzzle piece in her hand fell to the floor. Arthur didn't notice. He left as quickly as he came, leaving behind only the echo of his concern for the financial empire he ruled. Helena felt a wave of sadness for the girl. Determined to find out what those cake drawings meant, she had an idea. She took Leah's tablet, an expensive device locked down to everything except educational apps. She sat next to the girl and opened the calendar. "Leah, let's look at the days of the week," she asked, pointing to the screen. She swiped through the days, naming each one until she got to the following week, and then she saw it. On one of the days, right in the middle of the week, was a tiny, almost invisible icon, a little colored balloon. Helena's heart sped up. She tapped the day and a note opened. There was only one word written: birthday. The date was 3 days away. That was why. The cakes, the silent expectation, the melancholy in her eyes. No one in this house seemed to remember the most important day in this child's life. The sound of firm footsteps in the hall made her close the app quickly. Mrs. Albright entered the room, her gaze as sharp as an eagle's. "It's time for scheduled reading. Delays are not tolerated." Her voice was low, but it carried the weight of a final warning. She looked at Helena, then at Leah, and a dark understanding crossed her features, as if she knew some rule had just been broken. That night, in the small, impersonal room she'd been assigned, Helena couldn't sleep. The image of the little balloon on the calendar and Leah's cake drawings danced in her mind. She sat up in bed and opened her wallet. Inside were a few crumpled bills and a handful of coins. It was her bus fare for the week, every cent accounted for. There was no way to buy a present, not even the ingredients for a decent cake. A sense of powerlessness crushed her. How could she compete with an indifference sustained by an incalculable fortune? She looked at her nightstand and saw the paper airplane Leah had given her. Her first gift. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the imperfect folds, and then an idea sparked. A crazy, risky idea that could cost her everything. But as she thought of the smile she might put on Leah's face, fear gave way to a fierce, unshakable courage. She knew what she had to do. The day before Leah's birthday was the longest day of Helena's life. The tension in the mansion was palpable, like the static electricity before a storm. Mrs. Albright seemed to have developed a sixth sense for Helena's intentions, following her with her eyes, questioning every small deviation from the routine. A glass of water at the wrong time was cause for a veiled interrogation. A different ribbon in Leah's hair prompted a monologue on the importance of standardization. Helena felt like a tightrope walker, with a chasm of suspicion on either side. She needed an excuse to leave, even for just half an hour. The opportunity arose mid-afternoon, when she realized her modest bottle of shampoo was almost empty. With her heart pounding, she approached the housekeeper in the kitchen. "Mrs. Albright, excuse me, I'm out of shampoo. Would you allow me to go to the corner store? I'll be quick. Leah is resting." The housekeeper sized her up, suspicion etched into every line on her forehead. For a moment, Helena was sure her request would be denied. But to her surprise, Mrs. Albright shrugged. "Go, but you have 30 minutes, not 1 minute more." Racing against the clock, Helena practically flew down the streets of the wealthy neighborhood, feeling the stark contrast between the imposing facades and the simplicity of her goal. In the small grocery store, her eyes didn't search for cosmetics, but for the dry goods aisle. With trembling hands, she grabbed a bag of cornmeal mix, the cheapest brand, a small bag of sugar, half a dozen eggs, and a roll of colored crepe paper. At the register, she counted out the coins one by one. The money that was supposed to be for her transportation now transformed into a promise. She had just enough left for a tiny bag of star-shaped sprinkles, which the cashier handed her with a kind smile. Back at the mansion, her heart still hammering, she hid the brown paper bag at the bottom of her closet, under an old coat, praying that Mrs. Albright's veiled inspections wouldn't reach it. Later, the atmosphere in the house grew even heavier with the arrival of a female voice, shrill and impatient, coming from the speaker system in Arthur's office. It was Veronica, his ex-wife. Helena, passing by the hallway, couldn't help but overhear, "Arthur, this is unacceptable. The Foundation's gala is next week, and you still haven't confirmed if Leah can at least make an appearance. People ask, they talk. It's an issue of image, for God's sake, what will they think of us?" Arthur's voice was a cold, controlled counterpoint. "Veronica, we've discussed this. Leah is not an accessory for your social events. She isn't comfortable around crowds and flashing lights." Veronica let out a humorless laugh. "Comfortable? Arthur, she's a child. She needs to be exposed, to get used to it. Or are you going to keep her locked up in that fortress of yours forever? Just to protect her inheritance from prying eyes? That's not protection, it's cowardice." The word inheritance was spoken with a venom that made Helena shudder. The call ended abruptly, but the ensuing silence was even more oppressive. Night finally fell, cloaking the house in its usual darkness. Helena put Leah to bed, softly singing a song about stars. Before closing her eyes, the girl held Helena's hand and squeezed it with surprising strength, a silent plea, a final vote of confidence. Hours later, when she was certain everyone was asleep, Helena slipped out of her room. Barefoot, so as not to make a sound, she crept to the kitchen. The space, a hub of timed activity during the day, was now a sanctuary of steel and shadows, lit only by a sliver of moonlight through the window. She took her humble ingredients out of her apron pocket and placed them on the granite countertop, which looked like an altar. With infinite care, she began to mix the cornmeal, eggs, and sugar. The only sound was the wooden spoon turning in the bowl. The familiar, comforting scent of raw batter began to spread, a perfume of home, of affection, of pure and simple goodness. When the batter was perfect, she poured it into a small pan she found in the back of a cupboard. The exact moment she opened the door to the industrial-sized oven, a sound cut through the silence of the house. The unmistakable creak of a door opening down the hall, followed by the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps coming in her direction. Helena's blood ran cold. She shrank behind the counter, the cake pan in her hands, her heart paralyzed with panic. The footsteps drew closer, echoing in the silent kitchen like hammer blows against Helena's chest. Each second stretched into an eternity of dread. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for Mrs. Albright's cutting voice or, even worse, Arthur Vance's icy baritone, sentencing her to immediate dismissal. The hallway light flickered on, flooding the kitchen entrance and casting a long, menacing shadow that reached Helena's bare feet. She held her breath, clutching the cake pan to her chest like a useless shield. "Who's there?" a voice asked, but it wasn't the voice she expected. It was trembling, sleepy, and unmistakably childlike. Helena opened her eyes and peeked over the counter. Standing in the doorway, her small bare feet on the cold marble and her star-print pajamas rumpled, was Leah. Her eyes, wide and curious, showed no fear, only a genuine curiosity, drawn by the sweet smell that was beginning to fill the air. A wave of relief so intense washed over Helena that her legs felt weak. She rose slowly, placing a finger to her lips in a plea for silence. "It's me, sweetie. Go back to bed. Everything's fine." But Leah didn't move. Instead, she walked slowly into the kitchen, her eyes fixed on the bowl and ingredients on the counter. She pointed a small finger at the bag of cornmeal mix, then looked at Helena, the question clear in her gaze. Helena smiled, a conspiratorial smile. "It's a secret," she whispered, "a secret for a very special girl." She took the pan, and a car, with a swift, silent motion, placed it inside the oven, setting the temperature to its lowest setting. The smell of baking cake began to intensify, a warm and welcoming aroma that seemed to fight against the sterile chill of the room. Helena took Leah by the hand. "Now, off to bed, before the insomnia monster gets us." The girl, for the first time, didn't resist. She let herself be led back to her room, but her eyes, before they closed, were shining with an anticipation Helena had never seen before. Back in the kitchen, Helena set to work on the second part of her plan. With the scissors she had borrowed from the office, she cut small banners from the colored crepe paper, taping them to a piece of yarn she'd unraveled from the hem of an old sweater. She made makeshift balloons, filling scraps of paper with air and tying them with the same yarn. The kitchen, little by little, was transformed. The stainless steel counter was decorated with a string of banners, and the lacquer cabinets gained spots of color with the little paper balloons. The cake was ready, golden, humble, imperfect, but with a scent that promised happiness. Helena placed it on a plate and, with her fingertips, scattered the star-shaped sprinkles over the top. Something was missing. The candle. She hadn't had money to buy one. Desperate, she searched every drawer, finding only expensive kitchen gadgets and appliances she didn't even know how to use. Her gaze then fell upon the box of emergency matches kept next to the stove. An idea, a final act of improvisation, sparked. She took one of the matches, broke off the sulfur tip, and carefully stuck it right in the center of the cake. It was her candle, a fragile but luminous symbol of hope. Exhausted but with her heart overflowing, Helena allowed herself to sit for a moment. She looked at her work, the simple decorations, the cornbread cake, the improvised candle. It was nothing compared to the luxury that surrounded her. It had no profit margin, would generate no dividends, nor would it increase anyone's net worth. But there, in that silent kitchen, she felt she had created the most valuable thing in the world. The distant sound of a car alarm jolted her from her reverie. Morning was coming. She had to get everything out of there before the first staff member arrived. But where to begin? The smell of the cake had already permeated the entire ground floor. How could she possibly hide joy? Just as she stood up to dismantle her secret party, she heard the soft whoosh of the private elevator descending. It was Arthur. He always woke before sunrise to check the Tokyo stock market. Helena froze, panic returning with full force. There was nowhere to run, no way to hide. The kitchen door would open at any second. The soft chime of the elevator arriving on the ground floor was like a death knell. Helena stood paralyzed in the middle of her decorated kitchen, the scent of cornbread cake betraying her crime of affection. The metal doors slid open, and Arthur Vance appeared, already dressed in his impeccable dark suit, the focused expression of a man already immersed in a world of compound interest and fluctuations in the euro. He was walking toward his office, his gaze fixed on the tablet in his hands, when he stopped short. His nose twitched, catching the unusual aroma that broke the house's aseptic monotony. He lifted his eyes from the screen, and his jaw dropped. The scene before him was so incongruous that for a moment he seemed to think he was still dreaming. His kitchen, a sanctuary of minimalism and efficiency, was adorned with crepe paper banners and makeshift balloons. In the center of the island, a simple cake covered in colored stars, and next to it, the caregiver, Helena, pale as a ghost, her eyes wide with terror. The silence that fell was heavier than any shout. Arthur's grey eyes swept over the scene, his analytical mind processing every detail. He didn't look furious, but something even more frightening. Confused, as if a calculation error had appeared in one of his perfect spreadsheets. His lips parted to say something, but at that exact moment, a small figure appeared in the kitchen doorway. It was Leah, awakened by the smell or by a child's intuition. She stood there, her eyes shining at the transformation. She didn't see her father, or if she did, she didn't care. Her gaze was fixed on the cake. A smile, a true and radiant smile, the first Helena had seen in all this time, broke across the girl's face. "Cake?" she asked, her voice shy but clear as a bell. She ran to the counter, her small hands touching the banners with reverent delicacy. "For me," she whispered, looking up at Helena. Helena, her throat dry, could only manage a nod, her pleading eyes fixed on Arthur. "Today is your day, sweetie," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Arthur remained motionless, a statue in a suit, observing the scene unfold. He saw his daughter pick up a star sprinkle with her fingertip and bring it to her mouth, her eyes closing in pure delight. He saw her face get smudged with a little sugar. He saw the silent tears that began to stream down Helena's face, tears not of fear, but of overwhelming emotion. And then a thought hit him with the force of a punch to the gut. The calendar in his mind, usually occupied with closing dates for deals and board meetings, spun wildly until it landed on a date he should have known by heart. Today, it was today. He had forgotten his own daughter's birthday. The realization left him breathless. All his net worth, his fortune in stocks and Bitcoin, the countless possessions he had amassed, suddenly felt empty, useless, ridiculous. That cornbread cake, made with the caregiver's bus fare, held more value than his entire empire. He tried to hide the impact, adjusting his tie, clearing his throat, but the embarrassment was a red tide rising up his neck. He took a step forward, intending to say something, to reprimand, to restore order, but the words wouldn't come. What could he say? How could he justify his forgetfulness, his absence? The housekeeper, Mrs. Albright, appeared at the kitchen entrance, drawn by the commotion, her face twisted into a mask of horror and indignation at the sight. "Mr. Vance, what is the meaning of this? This mess? I told this woman." But Arthur silenced her with a simple raise of his hand, never taking his eyes off his daughter. He watched Leah take Helena's hand and place it on her own cheek, a gesture of pure affection. In that moment, he wasn't a billionaire, not a master of the financial universe. He was just a father who had failed in a monumental way. The complex architecture of his life, built on the foundation of control and distance, began to show its first cracks. The arrival of Veronica, his ex-wife, scheduled for that morning to discuss Leah's future, hung in the air like a new threat. He knew she would use any slip-up, any sign of instability against him. and the scene before him, however moving, was the personification of the disorder he had worked so hard to avoid. Trapped between shame and the fear of losing his daughter, Arthur found himself facing a choice. And the contemptuous look Mrs. Albright shot at Helena, a look that promised retaliation, made it clear that the storm was just beginning. Veronica's arrival was like a cold wind extinguishing the fragile flame of a candle. She swept into the mansion with the confidence of someone who still felt she owned the place, dressed in a white power suit that clashed with the tense atmosphere. Her stiletto heels clicked on the marble like a judge's gavel. Upon entering the living room where Arthur awaited her, her first reaction was to wrinkle her nose. "What is that smell? It smells like cornmeal. Poverty has such a distinct odor, don't you think?" Arthur didn't answer. He stood with his back to her, looking out the window, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The scene in the kitchen had destabilized him in a way no drop in the stock market ever had. Leah's simple joy at the humble cake and Helena's quiet dedication had opened a fissure in his armor of control. He felt exposed, vulnerable, and Veronica's presence, with her sharp critiques and calculated superficiality, was the last thing he needed. "Where is Leah?" she demanded impatiently. "We have to sort this out, Arthur. My offer is serious. She'll come live with me, she'll have the best specialists, she'll move in the right circles. What do you offer her? Isolation. And now, apparently, an unprofessional staff that turns your house into a county fair." Before Arthur could respond, Mrs. Albright entered the room, her face a mask of rehearsed concern. "Mr. Vance, excuse me. Mrs. Vance, something troubling has occurred." She shot a meaningful look at Veronica, an alliance forged in their mutual disdain for anything outside their control. The new caregiver, she has overstepped her bounds, introducing unapproved routines and foods, creating an emotional attachment that could be very damaging for the girl. Veronica smiled, a victorious smirk. "I told you, Arthur. People of her kind always get confused. Give them an inch and they take a mile. They get attached to your money, to your lifestyle." The unjust accusation made Arthur's blood boil. He knew, deep down, that Helena's actions had nothing to do with money or self-interest. They were an act of pure humanity, something Veronica and perhaps even he himself had forgotten the meaning of. He turned, ready to defend Helena, ready for the first time to put emotion ahead of logic. But in that moment, the unexpected turning point that would alter the course of everything happened. The living room door opened slowly and Leah walked in. She wasn't crying, nor did she look scared. In her hands, she held one of her drawings. It was a picture of a cake, the most colorful one yet. She walked with surprising determination, not toward her father, but toward her mother. She stopped in front of Veronica, who looked her up and down more with irritation than affection. "Leah, darling, Mommy is talking to Daddy. Go back to your room." But Leah didn't move. She held the drawing up to her mother. Veronica took it with her fingertips, as if touching something unclean. "Oh, how lovely. A cake. Now run along." It was then that everyone saw it. In the drawing, next to the cake, were 3 stick figures, one large, one medium, and one small. The medium figure, clearly female, was holding the small one's hand. The large figure stood slightly apart, alone. Above the medium figure's head, Leah had drawn a heart. The name Helena was scrawled beside it in a child's uncertain hand. Above the large figure, there was a dollar sign. "What is this?" Veronica asked, her voice icy. Leah pointed to the large figure, "Daddy." Then she pointed to the medium and small figures. "Helena, Leah, heart," she said, the words emerging with an effort that made them even more powerful. The drawing was a devastating X-ray of the family's soul. The simplicity of the childish lines revealed a truth none of the adults there had dared to admit. The heart belonged to Helena. The father was just the symbol of his net worth. Veronica looked from Leah to Arthur, her face contorted in a narcissistic rage. She didn't see her daughter's pain, only the insult to her own image. This was proof that she had lost her influence, that a stranger, a nobody, had taken a place that should have been hers. "Is that it, then?" she hissed at Arthur. "You allow a servant to turn your daughter's head against her own mother, to teach her to think of you as a walking bank vault." The accusation was absurd, but the damage was done. Mrs. Albright, seizing her opportunity, intervened. "The girl is confused, Ma'am. It's the result of this inappropriate influence." Veronica crumpled the drawing and threw it on the floor. "This ends today. I will not allow my daughter to be raised in an environment contaminated by unsuitable people. I'm calling my lawyer. I'm taking her with me today." She turned and, with a theatrical gesture of contempt, looked at Helena, who had appeared at the door, drawn by the voices. "And as for you," Veronica said, her voice dripping with venom, "you're fired." The word "fired" hung in the air, cold and irrevocable. For an instant, no one moved. Helena felt the floor disappear from beneath her, the unjust accusation and the venom in Veronica's voice hitting her with the force of a physical blow. Her eyes sought Arthur's, a silent plea for justice, for a shred of sanity in the madness. She saw indecision warring on his face, a battle between the cold authority he had always wielded and the new, fragile emotion that Leah and the cornbread cake had awakened. But the hesitation lasted only a second. Before he could form a word, Veronica advanced, her face a mask of triumph. "Mrs. Albright, escort this woman to her quarters. Give her 15 minutes to pack her things and make sure nothing of value leaves with her." The vile insinuation that Helena might be a thief was the final drop of humiliation. Mrs. Albright, exultant, grabbed Helena's arm with unnecessary force. "This way," she said, her voice smug. Leah, who had been watching from the doorway, let out a low whimper, a sound of pure anguish. "No," she cried, the words stronger and clearer than any she had ever spoken. "Helena, no." She ran and clung to Helena's legs, her small body shaking with sobs. Helena knelt, ignoring Mrs. Albright's tug, and hugged the girl with all the strength she had left. "It's going to be okay. My angel, I promise," she whispered, her heart breaking into 1,000 pieces, but Leah knew it was a lie. She clung to Helena, her face buried in her uniform, as if she could prevent the separation by the force of her despair. Arthur watched the scene, paralyzed. Every one of Leah's sobs was a knife in his conscience. He wanted to intervene, wanted to scream that this was a mistake, but Veronica's threat echoed in his mind. A legal battle, a scandal, the exposure of his private life. All of it could destabilize his empire, affect investor confidence, turn his assets into liabilities overnight. Fear, a feeling he rarely experienced in business, chained him down. With calculated cruelty, Mrs. Albright pried the child away from Helena and pushed her toward Arthur. "Mr. Vance will take care of you now, child." Leah looked at her father, her eyes flooded with tears and, worse, with a profound disappointment. She stopped crying. She just stared at him with a silent accusation that wounded him more than any word could. Helena was led from the room. 15 minutes later, she stood at the mansion's gate, her small bag in hand and an envelope with the pay for her few days of work. She hadn't been allowed to say goodbye. As the iron gate closed behind her, she felt as if she were being exiled from the one place where, paradoxically, she felt she had made a difference. Silence reigned once more in the mansion, but now it was a funereal silence. Veronica, satisfied with the devastation she had caused, turned her back on Arthur. "I'm getting my things from the car and taking Leah. My lawyers will be in touch with yours to formalize custody. Consider this a direct consequence of your poor management of human resources." She left, and Arthur was alone with his daughter. Leah wouldn't look at him. She ran to her room and slammed the door. The sound echoed through the empty house. Arthur walked like an automaton to the kitchen. The colorful banners were still there, a cruel mockery. The cornbread cake, with one piece missing, seemed like a monument to lost happiness. His eyes fell on a crumpled paper napkin next to the plate. He picked it up. On it, in a simple, round script, Helena had jotted something down, probably for herself, so she wouldn't forget. It was a recipe. Grandma's cornbread cake. Ingredients: 2 cups cornmeal, 3 eggs, 1 cup milk, love to taste, and a pinch of hope. A recipe that measured not ingredients, but feelings. He clenched the paper in his hand, the fragility of that gesture contrasting with the solidity of his wealth. Suddenly, a sound jolted him from his stupor, a noise of something being dragged upstairs, coming from Leah's room, followed by a deep, unsettling silence. A terrible premonition seized him. He raced up the stairs and forced the bedroom door open. Arthur's heart stopped. The desk chair was pushed against the wall, under the large window, and the window, which was supposed to be kept locked at all times, was wide open to the garden. Leah was gone. The panic that seized Arthur was a cold, paralyzing wave. For an instant, the world shrank to that open window and the terrifying emptiness of the room. His mind, accustomed to analyzing risk scenarios in the stock market, couldn't process the scale of this personal crisis. He ran to the window, his heart hammering against his ribs. The garden below was silent. The drop wasn't high enough to cause serious harm, but the thought of his daughter, small and vulnerable, out there alone, was unbearable. "Leah!" he yelled, his voice raw with desperation. No answer. Veronica entered the room at that moment, her face still flush with victory. "What's all the screaming, Arthur? Where?" Her voice died as she saw the open window and the look on his face. "Where is she?" Veronica hissed, her tone shifting from arrogance to icy accusation. "What did you do?" The injustice of the question jolted him from his paralysis. Without answering, he turned and ran down the stairs, shouting for Mrs. Albright, for the security guards, for anyone who could help. The search began, frantic and disorganized. Guards swept the walled perimeter of the property, the housekeeper checked rooms with nervous efficiency, and Veronica paced in the living room, phone in hand, alternating between threatening Arthur with lawsuits and calling influential acquaintances. Arthur, however, felt deep down that they were looking in the wrong place. Leah wouldn't just run away aimlessly. She would run to somewhere, or to someone. The napkin with Helena's recipe in his pocket seemed to burn. He remembered the desperate look in his daughter's eyes as she was torn from the caregiver. The cry of "No!" The truth hit him with brutal clarity. Leah hadn't run from the house. She had run to find Helena. But how? He didn't know where Helena lived. The hiring file had only a street name in a working-class neighborhood that, to him, seemed as distant and alien as another planet. A neighborhood where his capital wouldn't grant him instant access, where the street names didn't appear on his luxury navigation apps. As the commotion in the mansion grew, Helena was getting off the 3rd bus of her long journey home. The air was different here. It smelled of hot asphalt, of home cooking from open windows, and the sound of pop music mixed with children's laughter. The pain of her dismissal was still an open wound. But the familiarity of her neighborhood brought a small measure of comfort. She was walking down the street, greeting neighbors sitting on their front steps, when something caught her eye. At the small community center, set up in a church garage where she used to volunteer, there was an unusual amount of activity. Children were running in and out, and a woman, Miss Rosa, the project coordinator, was waving at her urgently. "Helena, thank God you're here. We have a visitor, a little lost princess." Helena frowned, confused. As she entered the colorful garage, her heart stopped and then bolted like a frightened horse. Sitting in a small plastic chair, her shoes caked in mud and her dress slightly torn, but otherwise unharmed, was Leah. The little girl looked up and her eyes filled with tears of relief. "Helena," she whispered, and ran into her arms. Helena held her tight, her head spinning. trying to comprehend the impossible. "How did you get here, sweetheart? How?" Miss Rosa explained. A rideshare driver on a trip in the area had found her wandering alone near the main avenue, looking lost. He asked her what she was doing, and the only things Leah could say were Helena and the name of the neighborhood, which she must have overheard in a conversation. The driver, a kind-hearted man, recognized her as that billionaire's daughter from the news, and not knowing what else to do, had left her in the safest place he could think of, the community center. As Helena processed the miracle and the danger of that journey, Leah pulled something from her small pocket. It was the paper airplane she had given her. It was crumpled, but whole, a symbol of their connection, the compass that had guided her there. In that instant, Helena forgot the injustice, the humiliation. All that mattered was that the girl was safe. "I need to call her father," Helena said, her voice firm. But before she could find a phone, the sound of an expensive car, powerful and out of place, braking sharply at the end of the street, made everyone turn. The door opened and out stepped Arthur Vance, his impeccable suit now rumpled, his hair disheveled, and his face pale with terror. His eyes met Helena's, and for the first time, she didn't see a boss or a multimillionaire. She saw only a father, terrified and desperate. Arthur's arrival in the community was like a spaceship landing in a remote village. The luxury car, a black sedan that gleamed even in the fading afternoon light, was an aberration among the colorful old Beetles and motorcycles parked on the sidewalk. Residents came to their doors, curious, whispering about the man in the expensive suit whose panicked expression contrasted so absurdly with the aura of power he exuded. For Arthur, the experience was equally surreal. He, who lived in a world of tinted windows and private garages, was now standing on a street of uneven asphalt, surrounded by stares that mixed suspicion with astonishment. This environment was the antithesis of his universe. There was no polished marble, only painted concrete. There was no silence, but a symphony of life. Laughing children, a barking dog, the sound of salsa from a nearby window. For a moment, he felt completely lost, stripped of all the tools he normally used to navigate the world, his money, his status, his authority. His eyes, however, were fixed on a single point, the church garage, and there, amid a group of children, he saw her, his daughter, safe, in the arms of the woman he had allowed to be humiliated and thrown out of his house. The relief was so overwhelming that his legs buckled slightly. He took one step, then another, his heart racing. As he drew closer, he saw the scene more clearly. Helena was sitting in a low chair, with Leah on her lap, speaking to her in a soft, reassuring tone. Around them, other children, some with visible intellectual disabilities, played with building blocks and paints. A makeshift chalkboard on the wall displayed drawings of letters and numbers, and Helena, at the center of it all, seemed like a queen in her true kingdom. She wasn't a caregiver, she was a teacher, a nurturer, a source of calm and affection in the midst of chaos. He stopped at the entrance of the garage, suddenly self-conscious, feeling like an intruder. Helena looked up and saw him. There was no anger in her eyes, no resentment, just a tired seriousness and genuine concern. "She's okay," Helena said, her firm voice breaking the silence between them. "She's scared, but she's okay." Leah, hearing her father's voice, buried her face in Helena's shoulder, refusing to look at him. That gesture, more than any word, struck Arthur to the core. His daughter, for whom he would move heaven and earth and spend his entire fortune, was afraid of, or worse, angry with him. He approached slowly, kneeling to be at their level, a gesture that felt foreign and unnatural to him. "Leah, I'm sorry," he said, the words coming out quieter than he intended. "I was so worried." He reached out to touch her hair, but the girl shrank back even further. It was there, in that humble garage, under the gaze of barefoot children and in the presence of a woman he paid a minimum wage, that Arthur Vance had the most painful revelation of his life. He realized that true wealth wasn't in his bank statements, his investment portfolio, or his company's cash flow. The real treasure was that embrace between his daughter and Helena. It was trust, love, human connection, and he, the multi-millionaire, was miserably poor in what truly mattered. I want you to come back," he said, addressing Helena, the words tumbling out. "I'll pay double, triple, whatever you want. Just come back." Helena looked at him, and for the first time, he saw a spark of disappointment in her eyes. "You still don't get it." "Do you?" she said softly. "It was never about the money. It was never a job. It was about her." She stroked Leah's hair. "She needs presence, not a paycheck. She needs time, not expensive gifts. And she needs a father who will stand up for her, who will fight for her, not one who cowers at the first complication." The words were direct, without the deference of an employee, but with the honesty of someone who had nothing left to lose. They hit him with a surgeon's precision, cutting through layers of pride and self-sufficiency. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but he knew she was right. He had failed. He had traded love for profit, fatherhood for deals. The conflict was written all over his face. He wanted to fix things, but he didn't know how. And Helena's hesitation, the steady gaze that said, "Your rules don't apply here," left him at an impasse. He couldn't buy forgiveness. He would have to earn it, and for the first time, he had no idea what the right investment would be. Helena's silent refusal, the dignity in her gaze that didn't bend to his financial offer, left Arthur disarmed. He remained kneeling on the concrete floor, his expensive suit gathering dust, his mind scrambling for a strategy, an argument that could reverse the situation. But all his usual tactics, aggressive negotiation, displays of power, the flaunting of his wealth, were useless here. This was a territory governed by a different currency, one he barely recognized, that of trust and affection. He looked around at the peeling paint on the garage walls, at the simple, worn toys, at the children who see, despite their obvious hardships, smiled with a spontaneity he never saw in his own home. This wasn't just a charity case. It was an ecosystem of mutual care. A place where a person's value wasn't measured by their net worth, but by their capacity to give and receive love. And Helena was the center of that universe. He finally understood that he wasn't just asking a caregiver to return to her job. He was asking someone to leave her true home, her purpose, to return to a gilded cage. "I was wrong," he said, his voice low, the confession wrenched from his pride. "I was wrong about you, and what's worse, I was wrong about my daughter. I don't know how to fix this." The honesty in his voice, devoid of any artifice, seemed to surprise Helena. The hardness in her expression softened, giving way to a cautious compassion. She knew that change wouldn't happen overnight, that years of emotional distance couldn't be erased with a single apology. But the vulnerability in his eyes was genuine. Before she could answer, Leah, who had remained silent in Helena's lap, stirred. She slid to the floor and walked slowly to a table where a few children were drawing. She picked up a yellow crayon and a piece of paper. With intense concentration, she began to draw. Arthur and Helena watched her, not daring to interrupt the moment. The other children, sensing the importance of the scene, also fell silent, forming a small circle around Leah. The girl drew for a few minutes. When she finished, she turned and, instead of showing the drawing to Helena, walked toward her father. With her arm outstretched, she handed him the paper. Arthur took it with trembling hands. The drawing was simple, almost abstract. There was a large yellow circle in the center, a sun. On one side, a small stick figure, clearly herself. On the other side, two other figures, side by side, holding hands. One wore a dress, the other pants. Leah then raised her small hand and pointed to the empty space between herself and the hand-holding couple. And then, In a whisper that seemed to echo through the garage, she said a single word: bridge. It was a stroke of emotional genius, a word that contained all her desire, all her pain, and all her hope. She didn't want to choose a side. She didn't want a father or Helena. She wanted a bridge to connect them. She wanted her two worlds, that of simple affection and that of lonely luxury, to meet. She wanted a family. The tears Arthur had been holding back finally came. He didn't try to hide them. He let them stream down his face, a baptism of humility. Helena's eyes were misty too. The wisdom of this small girl, whom society labeled as limited, was infinitely greater than that of all the adults around her. She wasn't just asking for Helena to come back. She was asking her father to change, to cross the bridge, to meet her and Helena in the world of affection. That drawing, that word, was the true ultimatum. Arthur looked from Leah to Helena, his heart overflowing with a mix of shame and gratitude. "I understand," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I'll build the bridge." The promise hung in the air, fragile yet full of transformative potential. Helena, however, remained silent. Her eyes, though emotional, still held a reservation. A promise was just a word. Building a bridge required work, sacrifice, and above all, time. And she feared that Arthur's world, with its relentless demands of business and profits, wouldn't grant him the time needed for such a delicate construction. The question hanging in the air was whether this promise would be just another short-term stock tip or a long-term investment for life. The days following Arthur's promise were marked by a tense, expectant quiet. He brought Leah back to the mansion, but the dynamic had irrevocably shifted. Helena's absence was a vacuum that not even the most expensive toys or elaborate menus could fill. Leah was physically present, but her spirit seemed to have been left behind in that colorful garage. She spent hours in silence, staring out the window, the bridge drawing always close by. Arthur, for his part, plunged into a state of deep reflection he was unaccustomed to. For the first time, he delegated important meetings, ignored insistent calls from his stockbrokers, and spent hours simply observing his daughter. He tried to connect, sitting on the floor to play with her, reading stories before bed. Leah accepted the gestures, but with a melancholic passivity that tore him apart. He was present, but the bridge didn't exist yet. The external pressure also began to mount. Veronica, furious over Leah's temporary disappearance and Arthur's refusal to simply fire Helena and move on, escalated her legal threats. Her lawyers sent notices, alleging an unstable environment and parental neglect. They wanted to force a custody hearing, and Arthur knew the image of Leah running away from home would be a powerful weapon against him. In parallel, Mrs. Albright, sensing her position threatened by Helena's potential return, began a subtle campaign of sabotage. She would forget to pass on messages, misplace Leah's favorite toys, and make disparaging comments about the former caregiver's destabilizing influence, always within Arthur's earshot. The walls were closing in. He was at a crossroads, with his empire on one side and the fragile promise made to his daughter on the other. The world told him to cut ties with the source of the problem, re-establish order, and protect his assets. But his newly awakened heart told him otherwise. The crisis reached its climax on a rainy afternoon. Arthur was in his office, trying to focus on a performance report for his investment funds, when he heard the sound of shattering glass. He ran to the living room to find Leah standing next a coffee table, its glass top smashed on the floor. Beside her lay a heavy crystal trophy he had received as Investor of the Year. Leah wasn't crying. She looked at her father with defiance in her eyes, a frustration that had finally exploded. It was an act of desperation, a cry for help. Mrs. Albright appeared, her expression a mixture of horror and poorly disguised satisfaction. "Mr. Vance, the child is out of control. This is the result of—" But Arthur didn't let her finish. He walked slowly toward Leah, ignoring the shards of glass and the housekeeper. He knelt before his daughter. And what he saw in her eyes broke him. It was the same loneliness, the same helplessness that he felt. In that moment, he made his decision. "Mrs. Albright," he said, his voice calm but with a thread of steel, "pack your bags. You no longer work here." The housekeeper gaped at him, incredulous. "But, sir, Now," he repeated, his tone final. After Mrs. Albright's stunned departure, Arthur picked up the phone. He didn't call his lawyers or his advisors. He called Helena. When she answered, her voice cautious, he got straight to the point. "Helena, I need you, but not as a caregiver. Leah doesn't need a caregiver. She needs us. And I don't know how to do this alone. I'm not offering you a job. I'm asking for help." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Arthur held his breath. Every second felt like an hour. He had fired the housekeeper, defied his ex-wife, and was now placing his fate in Helena's hands. It was the riskiest investment of his life, with no guaranteed return. Finally, her voice came, soft but firm. "Where are you?" "We're at home," he answered. "No," she corrected. "Where are you? Really?" Arthur looked at his daughter, at the luxurious, broken room, at the useless trophy on the floor. He understood the question. Where were they emotionally? "We're lost," he admitted, his voice cracking. "We're at the beginning of the bridge, waiting." The silence returned, and the uncertainty hung, more tense than ever. The door to reconciliation was open, but only Helena could decide whether she would walk through it. Helena arrived at the mansion in the late afternoon. The same imposing iron gates opened for her, but this time the feeling was different. There was none of the fear from the first time, nor the humiliation from the last. There was an apprehensive calm, the sense of being in the right place at the right time. The person who greeted her at the door was not a rigid housekeeper, but Arthur himself. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in a simple shirt and jeans, an image so startling Helena blinked, unsure. His eyes looked tired, but they held a new light of determination. At his side, holding his hand tightly, was Leah. Upon seeing Helena, the girl didn't run or shout. She just broke into a slow, luminous smile. A sun rising after a long night. That smile was all the confirmation Helena needed. She stepped inside and the door closed behind her, not like the seal of a prison, but as the start of a new chapter. The house was still the same, but the atmosphere had changed. The oppressive silence had been replaced by an expectant stillness. The shards of glass from the coffee table had been cleared, but the empty space where it stood served as a reminder of the crisis that had spurred this transformation. Arthur led them to the kitchen. On the granite countertop, arranged a bit clumsily, were the ingredients for a cornbread cake. A bag of cornmeal mix, eggs, milk, sugar. It was a peace offering, a symbol of his surrender. "I don't know where to start," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "I thought we could build the bridge together." Helena looked at Leah, who nodded emphatically, her eyes shining. And then she smiled at Arthur, a genuine smile of acceptance. "I think the first thing we need," she said, tying on an apron she found hanging, "is a very big bowl." In that kitchen, the three of them began to make more than just a cake. They began to rebuild a family. Arthur, clumsy, cracked the eggs, dropping shells into the batter. Leah, laughing, tried to fish out the pieces with her fingers. Helena, with a master's patience, guided them, turning chaos into collaboration. For the first time, the kitchen filled with laughter. Later, as the cake baked, perfuming the house with the aroma of hope, Arthur's phone rang. It was Veronica. He hesitated for a second, glanced at Helena and Leah, and answered, putting the call on speaker. Veronica's voice was shrill. "Arthur, my lawyers can't reach yours. What is going on? The hearing is set. I am taking Leah from you." From this Contaminated house. Arthur took a deep breath. "Veronica," he said, his voice calm and unshakable, "there will be no hearing. Leah is staying here. This house is no longer contaminated. On the contrary, for the first time, it's becoming a home. You are welcome to visit your daughter as her mother whenever you wish. But the rules have changed. My rules." There was a shocked silence on the other end, followed by a string of threats that lost their power against Arthur's newfound conviction. He hung up the phone and looked at Helena. "It's over," he said. The legal battle was won before it began, not by lawyers, but by a cornbread cake. The arc of Helena's suffering and humiliation closed there, not with revenge, but with the validation that her values, affection, presence, simplicity, were, in the end, the most valuable capital of all. That evening, they ate dinner in the kitchen, 3 people sharing a simple meal. Leah, sitting between them, chattered excitedly about her day at the community center. Arthur listened, fascinated, discovering a universe about his daughter he never knew existed. He spoke of his own fears, of how lost he felt in a world he thought he dominated. Helena listened to them both, her heart serene. She was no longer an employee, nor a savior. She was part of something new, something they were building brick by brick. At the end of the night, a sleepy Leah hugged them both at the same time. "My bridge," she whispered, before drifting off to sleep in her father's arms. Arthur carried her to bed, and when he returned, he found Helena in the living room, looking out the window at the dark garden. They stood in silence for a moment, a comfortable silence, full of unsaid words. "Thank you," he said finally. "You didn't just save Leah. You saved me from myself." Helena turned to him, her eyes full of a deep tenderness. "We saved each other, Arthur, all of us." And in the look they shared, there was the promise of a future, not a fairy tale, but something real, built on truth, forgiveness, and the courage to start over. A month later, Arthur Vance's mansion was unrecognizable, not in its structure, but in its soul. The doors, once always closed, now frequently opened to the sound of children's laughter. The immaculate garden, once a sterile landscape, now had a swing set and a small vegetable patch where Leah, hands dirty with soil, was learning to plant sunflowers. Arthur, using his vast capital and business genius, had made the greatest investment of his life. He transformed one wing of the mansion into the headquarters for the Bridge Project. It was an activity center for children with special needs, inspired by Helena's volunteer work, but with resources she had never dreamed of. Cold luxury had given way to warm purpose. The abstract art had been replaced by colorful drawings, and the silence was broken by the sound of life, of progress, and of joy. Helena was no longer an employee. She was the director and the heart of the project, working side by side with Arthur. He handled the management and fundraising, ensuring the legacy of this transformation would be lasting, while she cared for the people, ensuring the essence of the place, affection, would never be lost. The relationship between them blossomed on a foundation of mutual respect and growing tenderness. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but a real partnership, forged in adversity and cemented by their shared love for Leah. It was late-night talks about a child's progress, knowing glances over Leah's head, hands that met for an instant over a blueprint. It was the slow, solid construction of a bridge just for them. Veronica, after a few failed attempts to fight the change, accepted a settlement. She visited her daughter sporadically, always a little uncomfortable in this environment she didn't understand, but Arthur's firmness kept her at bay. He had finally learned that protecting his daughter wasn't about isolating her, but about building a world around her where she could be strong, loved, and above all, happy. Arthur's old wealth, made of dollars, euros, and gold, hadn't vanished, but he had discovered his greatest fortune was the emotional equity he was building day by day. That afternoon, The mansion's garden was full of people. Children from the Bridge Project and from Helena's old community ran across the lawn, their parents chatting animatedly. At the center of it all, on a large picnic blanket, was a cornbread cake. Leah, a crown of flowers in her hair, looked at the single candle stuck in the middle. She was turning 5 years and 1 month old, but they had decided every day was a reason to celebrate. Arthur sat on one side, Helena on the other. He watched her talking to one of the mothers, the way her face lit up, and felt a wave of gratitude so profound it left him breathless. She felt his gaze and turned, smiling at him. In that smile was the entire promise of a future. Leah got everyone's attention by clapping her hands. "Now," she said, her voice clear and firm. The children sang "Happy Birthday" in a cheerful, off-key chorus. Before blowing out the candle, Leah looked at her father, then at Helena.